Hey everyone, Doug here with B&H. Want to see something cool? This is the brand new Sigma 100 to 400mm f5 to 6.3 zoom lens. You can see it here on the Sony a7R IV, and I was lucky enough to test drive the lens, so let's talk, shall we? First off, let me just get this out of the way. The lens is a lot lighter than it looks. At just 1,135 grams, I was able to comfortably hold it one-handed, and I walked all around my neighborhood, probably 20 or so blocks, and surprisingly, it never felt like there was any strain on the lens mount, or my wrist for that matter, but we'll talk about that in a bit. The 100 to 400 is a DG/DN OS lens under Sigma's contemporary line of lenses. These are smaller, lighter, and meant for all-around usage, but there's a lot going on here that makes it pretty special. As a DG lens, that means it has full-frame coverage, while OS of course means that it offers optical stabilization. But the most important spec here is the DN designation. Some of you may be aware that Sigma already has a 100 to 400mm lens with the same aperture and very similar specs, but the DN version is a completely native mirrorless design, which really benefits the size, weight, chromatic aberration, and overall image quality, which I gotta say is pretty fantastic. So a lens like this, as you can imagine, is geared towards outdoor shooting. Long distances, wildlife, and intricately compressed landscapes are great for a lens with this kind of reach. In concert with the ridiculously good AF of the a7R IV, the aperture is never a problem when it comes to autofocusing. The lens grabbed quickly in every case. You can see here just how accurately my cat's eye is captured. Tracking AF is also fantastic, as you can see, which is great for anyone shooting wildlife or sports. Contrast here is beautiful, which quite frankly I'm not used to since I usually shoot on older lenses when shooting this long, but it really looks fantastic here. The colors are vibrant, the bokeh is smooth and pleasing to the eye. Now to be fair, modern lenses do benefit a lot from the low light sensitivity of their equally modern cameras, making an aperture like an f5 to 6.3 a realistic option. But the lens does update the focal arrangement here. Rather than the 21 element 15 group setup seen in the previous version, the DN lens sees 22 elements in 16 groups. Despite the increase though, the lens is smaller than you'd expect and is definitely going to be easier when shooting for extended periods of time. And that brings us to the lens itself. It weighs slightly less than the older 100 to 400, as I was saying before. It's 1135 versus 1160 on the non-DN. Physically, the lens has two rings, one of which is a buttery smooth focus ring. Being a fairly compact lens for its focal length, it has a 67mm filter thread. You have your usual switches, AF, MF, minimum focusing distance, and optical stabilizer options, but rounding it out is a convenient AF lock button on the barrel itself. Now this is useful for tracking shots where you don't want the autofocus to move. And having it on the barrel means that a back button focus press, which is the traditional way to AF lock, can be done without shaking the camera body. Users of the previous 100 to 400mm lens might remember that it lacked a tripod foot around the barrel that could be used to shift the weight off the camera mount and onto the actual lens itself when on a tripod. Now, Sigma has thankfully listened here, and while I did mention that the setup is pretty light as it is, they did refine the design to allow for a tripod socket connection. There's now a rubber seal towards the back of the lens where you can attach the TS111 tripod socket, so if you want it for longer shooting sessions, now you have the option. Lastly, the included hood has a fancy little detail of including the name of the lens printed right on it. No more confusing one lens hood for another. So that's it for the Sigma 100 to 400mm f5 to 6.3 DG/DN OS. I'm Doug with B&H, and I'll see you next time.